What makes a good story? Is it conflict, plot, character development, the use of empathy and emotion, and being able to pull the reader or viewer into the story to make them feel connected? Actually, I would stand to say that it's none of those things, but how the medium of telling the story utilizes the tools that it has available to it to do those things. Now, to start off, what are the main methods of storytelling going on into our day and age? I would like to argue that there are three primary methods of storytelling. That is books and literature, comics, stuff like that, video, YouTube, movies, TV show, anything falls under that category, and alternatively, the third option that I want to propose is video games. How are video games the most, or have the potential to excel the most in telling a story? So if our primary three methods of telling a story are books, movies, and games, let me just start by saying I think I have experience in all three of these categories. I actually wrote a book. It was called Natuma, and you could say it was half decent. I created a movie and create YouTube videos all the time. The movie's called Chipotle. It was probably a little bit better than the book. And I create video games all the time, usually not holding much of a story, but I can confidently say most of them aren't that good at all. Now, I don't think anyone would have a hard time in saying, if you look at the different modes and mediums of telling a story right now, literature is by far the most excelling in this category. And if you were to read a book and watch a movie, or watch a movie and read the book of the same story, a lot of the time people would say the book tells the story better than the movie. That's because books have had the most period of time in which people have been able to utilize the tools that has been available to it. So there are professional authors that have been working for years. It goes way back to Jesus' time and before then, when people were writing literature and reading and telling stories through that method. Now, movies is a lot newer in comparison to that, in that it's only been coming out in the last couple 100 years or whatever, right? Cross compare that to video games. Video games have the shortest amount of time available to them in which they could have been able to properly and effectively tell a story. So they are the youngest in their generation of storytelling mediums. Why would I like to argue that video games have the most potential in telling a story? And before you get all up in arms about that, I believe there are a few main characteristics that make up a good story. The first one being choice. In a book or a movie, if you're sitting there watching the content or reading the content, you aren't able to impact the story at all. It is how the author wrote it or shown it in the movie, and it can stay like that, and they can make you feel as pulled into the story as you want, but in the end, you're never going to be able to actually change the story. Where if you take that into cross-compare that to video games have the potential to actually alternate the story depending on how you play it. Now, when telling a story and using different methods of choice, there are multiple different ways that a video game can do this in what the game is actually doing and how you are playing the game, the moves that you take, and the actual way the narrative of the story is written out. So your player can choose whether he makes friends with this person or doesn't. For example, there's a moment in Life is Strange when one of your classmates will either commit suicide or not, depending on the choices that you make, and no other movie or video game could impact your choice in that same way, because even if a close character dies or something happens in a book or a movie, you can feel close and related to that person, but it's never going to be the same, because when you play a moment like in Life is Strange, that's the direct result of your choices and decisions, and it possibly could have been avoided as a result of your actions. Next, we have pacing. Or a book, they are set to the pacing of how it is, and it's stuck how it is, and it's fixated, and you read through it, and sure, you can take your time on how long you take to read a book or how much time you spend watching a movie, but in a video game, you actually have the potential opportunity to go on side quests or divvy away or postpone actually completing an action or trying to avoid something, or the way of how fast the story goes is dependent on your choices throughout the game. In games like Zelda Breath of the Wild, the whole story is just told based on your actions and what you do, and you can choose to pursue side quests or the main plot line throughout the entire game. But in all different storytelling games, you can always take the option to say no and walk away, or just don't respond, and the length and the amount of time that the conversations go on is dependent on you as the player. Next, there's environment. A world or a movie, they can build the environment how they want around and make it look however they want, but how is it different and unique in a video game? So in a movie, you can see they can create custom sets and fixated things, and sure, it can be dynamic and change as the movie goes on. Or in a book, they can make it sound however you want, and it's up to your envision. But in a video game, you can actually go and explore the environment, like in BioShock, and the whole game is told about the environment around you and how you interact with it. As you go forward playing the game, you can explore the environment, and actually the world that you're in can tell the story that you're following along, and the story is tied into the whole world, and it's not just stuck fixated in each scene from each angle, from each perspective. As you have the opportunity to freely flow around and explore the world, it's up to you as a player to discover the hidden secrets within it. Half-Life 2 branches off this idea in which you play it from the first-person perspective as the main character in the game, but you never get to see your face or know who you are or say a single word.
Man, a few words, aren't you?
But only the world that is around you and the world that you talk to people and they talk to you, and it builds up who you are as a character, and you slowly start to figure out who you are, even though you're playing the perspective of yourself. The game doesn't have any UI in it, but is fully based off the world around it, and you have to go and look at a newspaper on the wall or read a poster on the wall to see something, to learn something about the world, and the way that the world is telling you information about it doesn't need to have a UI, but is more like a movie experience through a video game. So alongside storytelling, video games excel in this area in more ways than just environment, pacing, and the choice in which you take to develop the story as it goes on, but actually in the visual techniques they use as they tell the story and the ways that they tell the story through animation and camera angles and lighting and character and all these dynamic things that, sure, it can fall under the same category as movies, but there's a whole new aspect in the way that you can actually do things is limitless in video games because there's no technology required other than just whatever you can imagine, really. And the key through this all is really being able to take your player or your character in your game or your main character or your protagonist in your book or your movie and being able to tie that character to you as a player or viewer or watcher or whatever it is. And if you can develop a personal relationship or feel connected to that character in the story, then you start to be able to create empathy and emotion. And once you can make that tie, you really have the availability to take that person who's reading or watching or playing your story and control the way that they're feeling towards it. Now in a video game, once you have that control of the player, then whatever you do or whatever they do as the player can completely change the way that they look out towards the story. Things that aren't available in books but are in movies and video games are visual advantages. There's no pictures in books. All it is words and words, right? But there's things that you can visibly see. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and with the camera and the lighting and the way the setting is designed, it's undescribable in words, but can tell you all the information you need to know in a single frame and flip through. Visually, going on with facial expressions and the look on people's face when they say a word, or how you use techniques of lines and shapes and camera angles and pans, and it's stuff that you're never able to complete in a book. Games like Journey and Limbo and Ori and the Blind Forest and Half-Life 2 and even games like Night in the Woods, they tell a story without having to say a word. And when you get into games like story mode games that don't have people speaking and voice narration, but they have text boxes, it's still another method of telling story, because once you read that, you can develop the way that that person is speaking on their own. And it's a different approach, but it actually allows you to be able to create this connection in the same way that you would be able to with books, but through a video game where the decisions are directly a result of your actions. What if I told you this was a video game? And it's run in real time on a regular consumer PC. Video games nowadays have the potential to go way beyond anything that they've been able to up until now. And this can be achieved by any regular person sitting in their bedroom at home who's messing around with the Unreal Engine. Beyond just visual, there's audio things that you can go beyond that isn't really explainable in text. Things that you actually audibly hear, music, and the way that you play notes and set the tone of a scene, or the tone that someone uses in their voice when they speak. It's not describable the same in a book, or at least not in the same short amount of time. Games like Abzu don't work without music, as they primarily dwell without even saying a word. They just simply play a music soundtrack, and yet it somehow can pull you into the emotion and feel the story of the game that you know is going on. Games that excel audibly, and when they focus on not even saying a word but using the audio and the sound effects and the music into their advantage. Games like Thomas Was Alone is fully narrated and the story is told directly by the narrator.
This all seemed a little dangerous. The world was not to be trusted.
There's a game called The Stanley Parable, which just so happens to have 19 different achievable endings, and it's conflicting, and it gives you this weird feeling when the narrator is directly telling you something that has to play directly into the game.
Are you really still in the broom closet? Standing around doing nothing? Why? Please offer me some explanation here. I'm genuinely confused. 2845. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this. Yet incredibly, by simply pushing random buttons on the keypad, Stanley happened to input the correct code by sheer luck. Amazing.
And games that excel both audibly and visually, that use voice narration and the world around it to tell a story. Games like Oxenfree and Firewatch, they do an excellent job of using the different characters around you and using the beautiful artistic work of the things that are going on to effectively tell a great story.
That storm knocked out the phone line I used to talk to the service, which means we're cut off.
I'll see what I can do.
You think you'll take to it? Being out here? The isolation gets to people.
Beyond visual and audio and different techniques of storytelling, there's actually proven facts that show how video games can excel in engagement levels in cross comparison to books and to movies, as you can zone out really easily when you're watching a movie or reading a book. But in games, studies have proven in schools, visual and audio learning experiences, when you're tied in, when you got that hands-on experience, it actually creates a different chemical reaction in your brain, which results in positive workings and a learning experience. There's a TED Talk talking about how games actually help you to learn and to grow as a person. It's talking about fast-paced video games. When you play fast-paced shooters, your eyesight is actually improved the more time you spend playing a game, despite what all the research says. There's a movie done by Netflix under Black Mirror, and it's called Bandersnatch. You may have heard of it. And it just so happens that that movie was the talk of the town for the week that it came out. It blew up because it's interactable and people have the choice to change the way that the movie plays out. And it creates an emotion in the person who's playing it because they feel like it's the direct result of them as the viewer or the player of the movie. But it's still a new thing, and they're still learning on how to do it effectively, and it will continue to grow and become better, but it may have the potential to tell stories better than any other medium out there. Now, with all this information taken into account, the plan was to be able to go from there and build my own game with my friends that effectively tells a story. And while I have a story written and concept art designed and mechanics in place, the main thing that I learned is it is extraordinarily difficult to build a game. And it's one of those things that takes years to develop and perfect, let alone do it for your first time. And so I started to get a game in place, but it wasn't to the same extent in which these games have been able to do it. Overall, you can see that in comparison to books and movies, video games have the potential to go through the roof once they learn to grow and develop. And they already are doing it through some of these amazing games and examples. But you'll learn and see as the medium continues to grow and mature, it will become something more that has the potential to possibly be the best method of storytelling. So my name is David, thank you for watching this presentation video, and I hope you have a great day.